Greetings, friends. I am Vitaly Portnikov. President Volodymyr Zelensky has joined the Ukrainian negotiating team, which has been holding talks in the United States in recent days with Donald Trump's special representative, Steve Witkoff, and Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. Today, in a virtual format, the president discussed with these American representatives the most critical issue regarding the ephemeral peace deal intended to put an end to Russia's war against Ukraine. As highlighted by Axios, which has become perhaps the main source regarding this peace plan in recent weeks, the key topics of these negotiations were territories and security guarantees. As we know, Russian President Putin has repeatedly emphasized that any ceasefire or conclusion of hostilities is only possible if the armed forces of Ukraine abandon that part of the Donetsk region which is still controlled by the legitimate Ukrainian government today. The very discussion of withdrawing Ukrainian troops from the Donetsk region, in my opinion, looks primarily like Putin's desire to destabilize the internal political situation in Ukraine and create conditions to expand the zone of Russian occupation well beyond the Donbass. Because imagining that Putin wishes to end the war solely by gaining a part of the Donetsk region is not very realistic at this moment. Moreover, in recent days, we have heard from the Russian president about the liberation of so-called Novorossiya. This could indicate an increase in Putin's appetites, demanding that Ukrainian troops also leave the territories of the Zaporizhia and Kherson regions, or even appetites extending to the entire left bank Ukraine. From the standpoint of Putin's ideological approach, any Ukrainian region can be declared a Bolshevik gift to Ukraine and, thus, appropriated by the Russian Federation. We do not know how Putin will act further in this direction. However, we see that the Americans are also not quite ready to simply acknowledge the withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from the Donetsk region as the best path forward, and are preparing some alternative proposals. Proposals which, in my view, the Russian president is unlikely to accept. I'm not even mentioning that Putin will hardly be satisfied with merely a de facto recognition of Russia's control over Crimea, Donbass, and other annexed Ukrainian regions. Putin will demand that Trump and European leaders recognize the fact of his occupation legally. According to current United States law, no American president can do this. And regarding the reluctance of European leaders to agree to the results of an occupation, results that would remind them of the actions of dictators like Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin, who were crucial allies at the start of World War II, well, it is not worth thinking that Europeans would agree to such a thing. But territorial negotiations are ongoing. Both Witkoff and Kushner continue to believe that the solution to this issue holds some kind of key to ending the Russo-Ukrainian war. Let me say right away, a solution tied to ending the war via these means simply does not exist in nature. Another complex issue that the Americans may be searching for answers to, but are unlikely to find, is the issue of security guarantees for Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelensky wants real guarantees. But after the new U.S. security strategy was unveiled, it is entirely unclear whether these real guarantees even exist. Previously, we considered a real guarantee for Ukraine's security to be our accession to NATO, and thus, the extension of Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty to us, which provides for the collective defense of partner nations against an attack. However, it is now obvious that the United States is trying to do everything possible to relieve itself of responsibility for the security of the European continent. Today, no one in the United States can clearly tell you whether Washington would truly be ready to defend, say, the Baltic states or Poland, if Russia were to attack those countries. And if it turns out that Article 5 no longer looks like the ultimate proof of security that it has been throughout the existence of the North Atlantic Alliance, then the question arises, what should security guarantees for Ukraine look like if the United States decisively opposes our country joining NATO? And can we really count on a clear decision that would imply that, in the event of a new Russian attack on Ukraine, the United States would be ready to defend our sovereignty together with Ukraine? Let me say immediately, if Washington had such a desire, such a decision could have been made back in 2014. Or in 2022. When the presidents of the United States were Democrats, Barack Obama or Joe Biden. But the last person who will make such a decision is the Republican president and isolationist by ideological dogma, Donald Trump. Therefore, no real guarantees that could prevent a new start to the Russo-Ukrainian war simply exist. Except, perhaps, for the arming of Ukraine with modern weaponry and turning our country into a true fortress against an attack, one that would inflict serious and unavoidable losses on the enemy. But the question arises, how much can we rely on such arming now? And how much time would be needed for it? So that a window of opportunity does not open for Russia to launch a new, more serious, and aggressive attack on Ukraine, should the fire on the Russian-Ukrainian front actually cease in the 2020s. And now we understand, Zelensky and his American interlocutors are discussing questions to which, in reality, there are no answers. Because the only question that Ukrainian and American negotiators should be discussing is how to force Russian President Putin to cease fire on the Russian-Ukrainian front, so that we can then begin talking about the terms of a peaceful settlement between Russia and Ukraine. And such conversations can last for 10 or 25 years, as we know from the experience of all previous conflicts. But since such an approach is not currently being applied by the Americans, everything we are observing today deserves a clear and understandable definition: white noise. Thank you, friends. Stay on this channel, subscribe to it, subscribe to my social networks, and to the Patreon channel which helps develop these resources. Use the sponsorship function on YouTube itself. Victory and peace to you. Best of luck.